So, Robert, you actually have a list for us
I
of
do.
7 silent wealth killers,
Seven deadly
the
sins.
7 deadly sins. So let's get right into it.
Mm,
The first one is lifestyle creep.
yeah. So this is the one that most people listening to this will be familiar with because everyone is, well, presumably everyone is making more money now than they did 5, 6 years ago. And yet most people, if they ask themselves, do I feel any wealthier? They'll say no. And it's because lifestyle tends to expand as our income expands. And we'll kind of go, God, I was taking home X amount per month, and now I'm taking home twice that 6 years later, but I still have the same amount in my bank account. And it's because you end up behavior. And we're really going to be talking about behaviors a lot today, but the behaviors are that, and it's because I'm worth it. So I make this amount of money now. So that's why I buy this brand versus that brand. That's why I shop in this shop versus that shop. That's why I go to this place on holiday versus that place on holiday. It's why I drive this car rather than that car. Do you understand? So it's the
Yes.
decisions we make, which we feel are matching our income, but not necessarily our wealth planning.
So, as I always describe lifestyle creep, is that there's always a better watch.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you become obsessed with that stuff, it's incredibly cancerous, and I mean that sincerely because it's okay. One of the best writers about wealth is a guy called Morgan Housel,
Yes.
and in his Psychology of Money book, is the best quote I've ever read about money, and it was the difference. It was an artist with a billionaire, and he said, "The only difference between me and him," he said, "What?" He said, "I have enough."
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the concept of knowing that this watch is perfectly fine. I don't need to get extra. It's about what you prioritize for your own needs, whatever fills your particular cup, rather than trying to say, well, I'm at this position in my company or I'm making this, whatever this level of income. So therefore I should be putting out to the world this image of my wealth. Whereas in reality, is that what you want at all? Or are you just doing it because quote unquote society says you need to do it?
Yeah, we've talked before about a lot of people who are earning, six-figure salaries,
Mm-hmm.
families both earning six-figure
Mm-hmm.
salaries, and they're really only a couple of paychecks away from a big challenge.
Yeah, it's incredible. The number of households, the CSO did a study 6 months ago. The number of households in Ireland that are making over 400,000 euros a year has doubled in the last 5 years.
Mm,
But yet we keep people have not. So what happens? Again, it's back to they'll probably send their kids to private school.
yes.
And they will buy a new car rather than a 3-year-old car. They will take 4 holidays a year when they used to take two. They will, buy more expensive clothing, whatever the case may be, because they feel that that's what they should be doing. But unfortunately, they're doing it to the detriment of their own personal finances because, as you said, whilst I would say they're a paycheck away, but certainly they're 3 or 4 bad months away from
Mm,
really being in what I would say a dire piece of financial circumstances because they won't have the money to pay their mortgage.
yes, yes. Number two, procrastination.
Mm. Long fingeritis is the worst disease to afflict Irish people. Sure, it'll be grand.
Yes.
And no matter what you're dealing with in life, but when it comes to your wealth, it's I have money in the bank, and this is the big emphasis behind what Simon Harris is doing. There's this 170 billion on deposit. Everyone knows they should be doing something with it. It's not like they know inflation's running now. They're saying close to 4%. The bank are giving me a half. But why aren't we doing anything about it? Because there's a degree of comfort
Mm,
of kind of, sure, it's grand and it's there and it's safe and it's not losing anything. Although financial professionals will tell you it's losing 3.5% a year because of inflation. But yeah, and we do tend to procrastinate because all procrastination is the avoidance of pain. And it's why podcasts like this are so important because people don't want to feel the pressure of making a financial decision.
yes.
So if they feel empowered and they feel educated, they won't procrastinate because they'll go, oh no, I get it now. I should be making that decision. If that makes sense to you.
Yes.
So if you feel more comfortable and knowledgeable about whatever you're about to do, whatever type of investment it is, you're far more likely to do it and do it quicker,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think carving out the time as well. I feel everyone we speak to who are on top of their finances,
Yeah.
whether it's like switching service providers
Mm.
or getting the best bang for their buck with their savings account, they actually put it into their calendar, into their diary, and they know they're going to have an afternoon next month where they do all this stuff, like an admin day.
Absolutely. I kind of look at things a bit differently there, and that I envy those people.
Yeah.
I let's just say I struggle with my weight every now and again, and I envy the people who are able to get up at 6 in the morning and go for a swim, do a 10-mile run, do their yoga, and off they go.
Yeah.
I kind of just say, I think sometimes we look at those and go, that's the optimal way, and I can't do that, so therefore I won't do it. And I kind of equate it to the gym, and I kind of just go, well, if you there's a reason why you pay a PT, because they'll hold you accountable, they'll make sure you're doing the right thing at the right time, and they'll get you there 4 days a week and do your macros and all that stuff. And I think if you're the type of person, and by the way, it's a normal person, that you're just not that way inclined, outsource it. And particularly when it comes to your wealth, because you have the money to do it. And this isn't me advocating for financial advisors. It could be your spouse, it could be a brother, it could be somebody else, but outsource that. If you're not capable of doing that yourself, well, then outsource it, because even no matter what fee you pay, it will be incredibly cheap versus what you would have lost by not doing anything at all. So I think sometimes we get caught up. The enemy of, done is perfect. And we keep striving for perfection. And I think, and it's great to say we have the 2 hours, but we don't. You've got 3 kids, you've got GAA, hockey, soccer, you've got an email, you got a call with the team at 8 o'clock who are over in such a place. Life is busy. So I understand that. And I'm not saying, I think people who do have that discipline, I love them. They're amazing. But they're at the far end of the bell curve in terms of what we're all like as people.
Yes.
So if I kind of stripped it back and said, well, what's more likely is just engage someone and they'll make you do it. And 9 times out of 10, you don't have to think about it then. So it's scheduled for you. If you're a financial advisor, well, whatever it is, that person in your life, you're meeting with them, if it's every quarter, every year, it doesn't matter. But at least you're doing that with them. And you can go, well, I didn't need to think about that, and I outsourced it.
Yeah. Number 3, success bias.
Yeah. So I'm a brilliant doctor, so therefore I should be a brilliant investor. I have built a fabulous business. My business is exporting to 32 countries and I employ 90 people. So I know how to invest. I am a brilliant engineer. The point is that we sometimes equate our own success with, well, we can transfer that to other skills. And the way I say to people is, I can't wire a plug, but I understand money. So what do I do when I don't try to wire the plug, because let's all say that's a pretty disastrous consequence if I do it incorrectly. So success bias is when people assume that they don't need the help because they're already incredibly competent in one field. And maybe they've been successful in the past. They may have bought some property and it done really well. Well, was that you, or was that just the property market? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, yes. Any house went up in 100% in the last 12 years. Was that really your genius in the property market, or did you just have money at the time and saw a property and said you'd buy it? And that isn't, I'm not denigrating it, but I'm saying don't confuse that type of success with competence and the capacity to be able to continue that into the future.
Number 4, you have financial nostalgia.
We tend to think, so this is the way it always was, okay? And how, again, property always goes up. Shares will go bust. So for 6 years, every client that we were introduced to from a new basis, when we talked to them about investing, they go, oh, the stock market's at an all-time high, stock market's going to collapse, stock market's going to go bust. And because the nostalgia was the great financial crash, the dot-com bubble, Aircom shares. So it does infect your thinking going forward, because the point behind that piece is, if we allow our previous experiences, it's okay. Like, previous experiences are important because they inform our capacity to be able to make a decision. Mm-hmm. But if we don't take the necessary, either do the research ourselves or get the advice ourselves, we're making decisions in a 2026 world on 2006 advice. So it could be, well, I know there's a way to avoid inheritance tax. Well, there was 25 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. Or there's a way to offset this against that. Well, you could, but you can't. And it's more that if you allow those nostalgias to infect you going forward, you're not really taking advantage of the fact that all of that information just gives you the capacity to make a better decision going forward. But yeah, we said we can just get too anchored.
Yeah, you mentioned Aircom shares there, and I think with that in particular, and then other more recent things, such as crypto crashes and everything, it can leave a lot of scar tissue. Mm-hmm. and it can make people very wary of investing again.
Yeah.
And actually, I wonder, will people, even when the government scheme
Mm.
finally comes along, which is a whole conversation in and of itself, will people be too scared to go again? Have people been too hurt by it?
I think some have,
Yeah.
but I do think, again, that there is an increasing awareness that we are losing money by not investing it. I think what we have in Ireland is a misallocation of risk. And risk is all about how do we come across risk? So if you think, probably one of the most risk averse age groups in Ireland today are 25 to 30, because they became teenagers during the crash.
Mm.
And they grew up with mum and dad fighting over money. They grew up with we're not doing that anymore. They grew up with, Dad, you're not changing your car this year. No, I don't have the money. So they came of age and they started to have that consciousness of going, oh God, this is bad things can happen, and look at the consequences of them. So we come across them a lot. We do a lot of company pension schemes, and we're talking to the staff, and it's amazing how risk averse they are.
Give me an example. So they just want the
When
lowest
you'll
risk
do a risk
pension?
profile with
Yeah.
them. It's a
Okay.
personality test.
Yeah.
And you'll say to them, you'll give a 20-minute brilliant slide deck about the benefits of compounding and, 40 years, look at the returns you could get, blah, blah, blah. And they'll fill in their risk profile, and it'll come out low to medium risk or medium risk. And they're 24, 25. And and I don't, it's just because their environment made them risk averse.
Mm.
And and then you'll get over 65s, their first experience was aircom shares.
Yes.
Like Ireland we had no culture of investing in Ireland. And we went from, like, again, typical Ireland, like one extreme to the other. No culture of investing. We had a government backed, which was incentive to buy shares in one company servicing one country in one sector, which is the definition of insanity. And it was like, put all your money into this thing. Sure, of course, no matter what happened, it was high risk. Even if Aircom did well, it's a high risk strategy. A basket of good shares never did anyone. Everyone did well in that. So that first introduction, and then Gen X got wiped out in the crash. And so, but I've seen an increasing appetite where people are just becoming, and it probably is, the social media is showing, oh God, look, how are they able to do all of that? Well, they're investing, you know what I'm trying to say? So there's a degree of social proof where if I invest, I can have this. So there's a degree of that as well that is infecting it. I do think the country will be slower to adopt, particularly the likes of that, let's call it the Simon Harris plan for now, that saving scheme, than he thinks, but they will adopt it because they'll see eventually it'll be a better offer for them.
Yeah. Number 5, the age risk mismatch.
This is a classic conversation with someone who's about ready to retire. And the way they look at it is, well, now I need to de-risk. So I've had all this money, I've been saving it to my pension for years and years and years, all my investing, and now I need to go really low risk. Mm-hmm. And then you say to them, okay, no problem. What's the purpose of the pot? And they'll say, well, I need to live on that. Yes, you do. And for how long? You're 62, median age, if you're 62 is 89 for a woman. So that's 27 years. This is to last you 27 years. So we're funding for an outcome that's potentially 27 years away. But we have an industry, and I do blame my industry, because it shows people, oh, we'll de-risk you as you get to retirement. Makes no sense, because the value of your investing portfolio is really when you're not funding it anymore. It's when you're drawing from it. So you need to be in risk. So that particular, if you want to call it, silent killer, is people who take no risk or low risk when they should have not all risk, but some risk. So we kind of use a method of, we'll front load. So we'll say, how much do you expect to spend when you're in your 80s? And we'll then put that into a really high risk strategy, because it's 20 something years away. And then we put the money that they'll need today for the next 4 or 5 years into low risk. So it gives them the confidence that they're invested appropriately, but at the same time, they're not losing out. And then and that is it. And as I said, when you get the challenge of getting younger people to take risk, because particularly with pensions, forget about, I'm not a big fan of somebody taking a 3 or 4 year investment horizon, saving for a deposit for a house, because I've been there when they found a dream home, they've got the mortgage approval, everything's great. A stock market crash, their deposit dropped by 10% and they don't have enough money to buy. And that's what tripped them up. I always I'm very mindful of that. But for long term, it's the challenge of people in their 20s, getting them to see this is 40 years away.
Yes.
Just, you don't have to worry about volatility. It doesn't matter. The global stock market looks like a staircase over 50 years.
Mm.
Now, within that, as in it's always going up, but within that, you'll have these massive shocks, massive crashes.
Mm.
But time is your friend when it comes to investing.
Yes.
And it's just people having, as I said, people who are coming close to retirement who are thinking that they have no time, but they have loads of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then people in their 20s and 30s just thinking, well, I'm too concerned about the volatility next year and the year after. And what they should be focused on is the compound interest
Yes.
they'll be earning in their 50s and 60s.
So should people in their 20s and 30s all be in high risk pensions?
Oh, God. Be careful here. So get financial advice. As a general rule for pensions, yes, I have no problem saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I have 120 years of empirical evidence to back it up. But they have to have the stomach for it. It's easy for me to say it, but they're the people who are going to get their statement on their pension and it's going to be down 20%. And they have to have the courage to just ignore that and go, it's temporary, it's fine. Remember what the financial advisor said. It'll all work out in the end. As long as, let's be serious here, it's a well-managed, diversified fund. I'm not talking about one share or, God forbid, crypto or anything like that. Yes. I'm talking about your standard pension scheme type of assets. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Number 6, drift.
Yeah, drift is, it's kind of, as I said, it manifests itself in many ways, but we just don't deal with it because we don't have to. So, how will I put it to you? I'm running a really successful business and it's great. And I have loads of money in the bank, in the company account. And I've changed my car and I'm fine. And I'm so caught up in the day-to-day running of my life and my business. I don't deal with the fact that I have an asset, a business that's accumulating, growing, cash within the business that's growing and growing, and my own, because I'll get to that. And that drift, and sure, I'm fine because they're looking at numbers and going, well, I'm actually fine. So there isn't an urgent need or an urgent imperative for them to take action because they've done the maths and they say, well, I'm going to be fine. So, but what they're missing, and because they can tell themselves a story that says, well, this is the right thing to do because I'm focusing on other things. So I don't have to deal with that thing over there. But 1 month, 1 year becomes 5 years, becomes 10 years. I came across a company recently and they had, I've no problem saying that no one would know them, but they had 14 million in cash and sitting on their balance sheet doing nothing. And it just, every year they were just making money and sitting in cash. They were barely funding pensions. It was crazy. But they were so focused on building their business, fabulous business, beautiful people. Their staff loved them, great business, great employers in their area. But they just kind of, no, sure, we're grand.
Your 7th and final silent wealth killer is the comfort trap.
Yeah. So the comfort trap is I have enough, which is, so I've just said to you a minute ago, that's a great thing to say, but it's like it's an illusion. It's that I'm feeling okay now, so I don't need to take action, because by taking action, again, I'm worried about the consequences of kind of screwing it up. Do you understand? So taking risk when I don't need to, if you think, or why do I need to invest in that now? I don't really need to because I'm comfortable now. And again, if someone is perfectly happy with that, I'm a big believer. Happiness is your return on investment. Mm-hmm. I've learned that because I know lots of really wealthy people and they're incredibly unhappy. Now, I know lots of wealthy people who are incredibly happy too, but I know lots of people who are having a pot to whatever in and they couldn't be happier. So I believe in prioritize your happiness and everything else will take care of itself. So if that's what makes you happy, it's absolutely fine. But why is it a wealth killer? It's because you're not taking the decisions. Even with a small, even 10, 20% of your accumulated wealth, that can have compounded effects for the next 10, 20 years because you just feel comfortable. It's grand. It's the same reason why people don't take out things like income protection or serious illness. They kind of go, well, I'm grand the way I am. They almost feel like they're jinxing it if they take out that type of cover. And I go, no, there's no, that's just not the way it works. If you're going to get sick, you're going to get sick. It's nice to have that safety net there if something happens to you. And it's the same here, is that you feel comfortable and you can feel then you can defer that and bringing it back to the procrastination, being the avoidance of pain. That's all the biggest killer of wealth are never the external factors. Tax, inflation, investment markets, they're internal. behaviors, biases, blind spots. They are. And from my perspective, like that's, if we focus on those pieces, we should hopefully avoid the 7
Yes.
killers of wealth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's just staying in that space, which is the behavioral space.
Mm.
What would be the easiest behavior shift for a person to make after listening to this, if they were aware of these 7 things that they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do?
Mm.
Is there a conversation they can have with somebody else or even with themselves to guide them on a better financial path?
Yeah. It's never the wrong time to do the right thing. Don't beat yourself up because I sat down with someone 3 years ago and they bloody told me to do this, that, and the other, and I didn't do it. And we spend a month beating ourselves up over that rather than just picking up the phone to the person you were talking to 3 years ago. Hey, how's it going? So yes, if you're in this position, have a conversation with a professional. That's it. Just and decide to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If after that conversation you find whatever the advice, then fine. But have the conversation, make the decision. But then, and it's a great question, have the conversation with yourself.
Mm.
I always say if the job of your money is to be on show, it won't be around very long. So if you find that you are keeping up with the Joneses, and that's really the silent killer of wealth, well, then have a conversation with yourself and go, is that a game I really want to play anymore? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Can I live without people saying to me, oh, you didn't change the car this year? No, I didn't change the car this year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you can have that honest conversation with yourself, I'll give you a good one. Like, it's incredibly common and it's so thematic, as I was saying, but I said, I wish there was a day when everyone in Ireland could walk out to their driveway and announce to their neighbourhood what they had in their bank account. And everyone would feel so empowered because everyone thinks everyone else has loads of money.
Yes.
They do.
Yeah.
And it causes so much financial stress, which causes the procrastination I spoke about. So I kind of just go, we should have National Liberation Day. But sincerely, and I think if we can have the conversation with ourselves around our spending that's important to us rather than important to our network, our society, whatever the case may be, and then take action. Yeah, that's you're already flying it.
Yeah, and I love that you said, don't beat yourself up. Financial forgiveness, I think, is such a big piece. Like tomorrow is a new day.
Like, there's a client of mine, and he's a cardiologist, and he said the amount of people coming to me at late 60s and go, oh God, I felt it 10 years ago, but I felt it was too late. And he go, it's never too late. I can get you, at 68, I can get you sorted. And you kind of just, people are the same thing. It's like everyone feels, and we beat ourselves up and we're so tough. And I came to think my own profession, there's a degree of finger wagging. Again, it's the pursuit of perfection. Why aren't you doing this? I saw the people on the TV and they're doing it this way. Aren't they great? It's fine. It's absolutely fine. We are where we are. We're all human. Once we now make a decision, sure, aren't we doing all we can do? And the biggest, regret's enormous when people hit 60s, 70s. And no one ever regrets not starting earlier. As in, everyone, the only thing is, I should have done it earlier. No one ever says, God, I started that pension too early, or I started investing too early, or I bought that house too early, or, so the timing will always be right as long as you act now.
Yeah. And we will leave it at that. That was brilliant and really unexpected advice. I loved all of it. Thank you so much for coming on, Robert.